Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the AWS team. Thank you for having us out here and for giving us this opportunity to come and present and share our story with you guys. More specifically, I'd like to send a special thanks to Fati, Zitzman, and Sunny Boy. We really appreciate all of the correspondence and hopping onto calls with us, responding to emails, and just for being great guys all together. Last but not least, thank you to you, the audience, for taking the time out of your day to come listen to what we have to say. Hopefully, after this, you guys can walk away with some lessons. We are from Pineapple. You can follow us on Facebook as well as Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @pineapple_SA. So my name is Ndabenhle Jr. Ngulube. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Pineapple. I'm a massive Ruby and JavaScript fanatic. And in my spare time, if I'm not coding, I'm either sipping green tea or playing soccer. Those are some of my passions. My GitHub handle for anybody who's interested is @Nda Jr. So you can just go ahead and follow me and we can connect.
Cool. And can you hear me? Okay. I'm Sizwe Ndlovu. I'm employee number 1 and the lead engineer. My GitHub handle is like that because that's what I was doing before I joined Pineapple, and changing it can be quite a mess. So yeah, that's me.
So I take it it's safe to assume that the majority of people in this room today have some sort of affinity to the startup ecosystem, right? Either you work at a startup, you used to work at a startup, you want to work at a startup, or even better, you want to start your own startup. And just as a side note, I personally think startups are amazing. They do some amazing things for the economy, not only in terms of job creation, but just in general thought leadership as well. So God bless startups and God bless everybody who's trying to push the whole startup agenda. For me personally, before I dove headfirst into the startup world, I always knew that the number one advantage of a startup was its agility, right? Your ability to ship out features as fast as possible. So as a startup, let's say you get feedback from your users, and some of your users say they want to have the feature to be able to upload profile images. Cool. As a startup, you get hard to work. You write up the feature, you check it in, you commit it, it gets QA'd, and eventually it finds its way to your production environment. But once we actually started our startup journey, we actually started to realize that there's more to it than what meets the eye. Sure, you might be able to let users upload images, but the real questions that arise are what happens to those images once they've been uploaded? So where are those images going to be hosted, and how do you plan to distribute those assets back to your users in the least latent manner possible? And as our journey continued more and more, and as good things started to happen for us, we started getting press publications. People were taking notice of what we're doing. And once again, these small devilish questions started to pop up. So eventually you get a publication, let's say Business Insider, and all of a sudden the traffic to your platform increases 60% in a matter of 1 hour. How are you going to maintain your service and make sure that you have the necessary infrastructure in place to deal with the added load? And even these things creep even to like more people-related things. So naturally, as a growing startup, you're going to have to hire more developers. And as your dev team grows from, let's say, 2 developers in the beginning to about 5, 6, eventually you're going to have to get to a point where you can give out the login credentials to your hosting environments to all your developers, but each developer has to have the right permissions in terms of read and write permissions. And last but not least, things such as your deploy strategies. What happens when one of your developers accidentally deploys a broken build to production? How are you going to manage that, and how are you going to roll back to the last known working build on production? So this really brings me to the topic of our talk today, which is AWS, from zero to here we go. And you'll immediately tell that this is a play on the proverbial from zero to hero. But rather than going for Hero, we've decided to go for Here We Go. And there's a specific reason why we went down that route. It's because we genuinely believe that as startups who are new to services, especially AWS services, it should be your number one goal to learn just enough to ship out your MVP. And as your experience and as your confidence grows more and more, you build on top of that knowledge, and eventually your infrastructure will become bulletproof. So in this presentation, we're going to share our AWS stories, the ups and downs, and hopefully you guys can learn from us and find out how to use AWS to ship out your product. So without any further ado, here we go. So just by a quick show of hands, how many people here have heard of Pineapple or know of Pineapple and what we do? Okay, that's quite a good turnout. I thought no one would know about us, but yeah. So for those of you who don't know who Pineapple is an all-app and a digital insurance offering. Essentially, we allow people to insure their belongings by merely snapping a picture of those belongings. And once you've snapped the picture, the app has artificial intelligence that guides you throughout the process. We require you to put in a few additional details, such as give the item a name, as well as put in your personal details. And finally, you put in your payment details. And typically, in under 1 minute, you get insured and you're covered for your items. So currently, we allow you to insure everything you own except your vehicle or the structure of your house. So furniture, electronics, TVs, even clothing, as well as wigs for any of the ladies here who are about that life. But really, the Pineapple story actually started in 2016 when myself and my two other co-founders, we entered an insurance startup competition. And essentially, this was a competition that was aiming to disrupt the insurance space. So the three of us entered this competition individually, and we were fortunate enough to be put onto the same team to represent Johannesburg in this competition. So for 6 months on a full-time basis, the facilitators of this competition, they provided us salaries as well as office space, so that for that 6-month period, all we had to focus on was trying to disrupt the insurance space. And it was during that competition that the idea that we came up with eventually morphed and became Pineapple. So at the end of that competition, all teams flew out to Germany to give their presentations, and whichever ideas they saw potential in, they eventually invested in. So that's kind of the path that we followed as Pineapple. And lo and behold, eventually we got investment, we got the green lights from our investors, and we secured an insurance partner to roll out our first insurance product. Now, we found ourselves in a position where now we have the cash and we're ready to build this thing. And there was one fundamental question we had to first ask ourselves before we started building up Pineapple. And that question was, how do we envision rolling this product out? And there were really three sort of options to answering this question. The first path that we could have gone down was to ship out a mobile responsive web app, right? So, build up a website. People go to that domain, they can log in, register, and by following a few steps, you eventually get insured. But we also knew that, as Pineapple, we wanted to do things differently. And we were looking around at other traditional insurance companies and the apps that they were rolling out. And the one thing that we noticed was that the onboarding, the process of purchasing a policy on these apps was completely horrible. It basically involved having to fill out long forms, a lot of drop-down menus, checkboxes, radio buttons, and it basically gave you anxiety trying to get insurance, which is pretty much the opposite of what insurance should be, peace of mind, right? And furthermore, we knew that we wanted our experience of onboarding to be very streamlined. We knew that we wanted people just to be able to snap a picture of an item and get insurance. And on top of that, when submitting a claim, we wanted people to have to just record a voice note when explaining what actually happened to your belonging that you're claiming on. So if you actually take a look at mobile responsive web apps, we saw that there was a layer sitting in between the actual end user and the native components that we needed access to, such as the camera and the microphone. And this layer was the browser. So immediately we knew that in order to provide a silky smooth user experience, we couldn't go down the mobile responsive web app route. So we scrapped that idea completely. The second option that we had was to go cross-platform native. So essentially building out separate code bases for our iOS and Android apps. Now already just the idea of maintaining two separate code bases for those platforms is already giving me a headache. Plus at the time we didn't have a lot of resources to be able to hire separate developers for each of those platforms. And our budget was really a shoestring budget. I mean, at the time, we were surviving off of popcorn and Woolworths water. So, yeah, our stomachs were rumbling, but our English was superb. So now that we had sorted out the front end, in terms of the back end of the app, we decided to go for, just to go back to the front end, the option that we decided to end up going for was the cross-platform hybrid approach. So we decided to go with React Native, and essentially React Native allowed us to port out our views using one code base. So we could port out iOS and Android views, but by only writing one JavaScript code base. And our development team is very heavy on JavaScript, so it meant that all of our developers could add value both on the iOS and the Android side. So moving on to the back end, we decided to go for a JavaScript-based framework as well, Express. And for those of you who know, that's a framework built for Node.js. And for our back end, we went for your typical RESTful API architecture. Sitting at the front layer of our back end, we have these APIs that route requests to the appropriate controllers. And from the controllers, the necessary database actions are done, be it persisting data, retrieving data, or deleting data. And finally, this takes us to our database of choice. We decided to go for a MongoDB. And for those of you who know Mongo, it's a NoSQL DB. And the reason why we went with this choice was because of the performance capabilities that it gives us, especially in terms of big data analysis. We are huge and bullish on big data, so we knew that in order to capitalize on that, we would go with MongoDB. The one drawback that we did learn the hard way from using MongoDB was that if you don't have a very strong model layer sitting in front of your DB, a lot of things can go wrong, especially with MongoDB. So essentially with MongoDB, instead of defining tables, you define collections. And it's very possible to alter an attribute on that table that doesn't exist. And we burnt our fingers a few times while building up the MVP. So in order to remedy that, we went for Mongoose as basically our ORM sitting in front of the DB. And Mongoose is a very lightweight ORM that comes with very nifty validation rules and schemas for your collection. Last but not least, we have a very lightweight web application that we built out using Ruby on Rails. Funny thing about the web application was that it wasn't until about a month to a month and a half before we had to launch that we actually realized that we needed a web app, because we were just sitting around the office one day just talking about our claims process on the app, and we actually realized for the first time that, okay, what happens if a user actually loses their phone and they can't administer a claim using the cell phone? So in a month and a half, we quickly mocked something out, built it up using Ruby on Rails, and eventually shipped it out. So that's pretty much an overview of the architecture of the Pineapple infrastructure.
So, I think at about this point, I had joined Pineapple. They had done such an amazing job with their marketing, and I think at the time I joined, there was about 30,000 followers on Instagram. You saw the sign-up screen at the beginning. I think they had like 3,500 to 4,000 sign-ups. On Facebook, we had like 4,000 likes, you know. So, I mean, that was when I joined, and then we only had launched, you know, like a few months later. And at that point, we were so confident that at the moment we unleash all of this, we're gonna have instant 30,000 signups. Everyone who has subscribed to us, who's followed us, is just gonna, you know, kind of get with the platform because there's been so much excitement over it. And then, you know, there's expectations and there's reality, and the reality kind of more felt like this. Yeah, it literally felt like a double KO, you know. Um, in fact, I'd probably even extend that triple, you know, it was just kind of blow after blow. We finally did release our app. We didn't get all the 30,000 people obviously signing up. Of those who did, we did do a beta release, of course. And of those who did sign up, started using the app, we then encountered bugs. You know, things just started going wrong. As you can see, like we had images not loading. We had like the feedback we had through our chat platform, you know, people asking how legit we were. This bug where someone couldn't enter the value of the asset, I told them the maximum value is 0. So you just cannot add anything. And if you're familiar with React Native, I'm sure you know that red screen very well. Undefined is not an object. That is probably one of the most common things you'll bump into with with JavaScript React Native. So it was just a plethora of bugs, you know, and we just, you know, kind of had to just humble ourselves and just, you know, take the steps slow. And, you know, these things, they will happen, of course, you know, and it's just about, you know, managing those bugs and kind of squashing them as you kind of go. So we established the process of managing these bugs, and we had an automated bug reporting system that we use that's linked to our Slack. So every time we get a certain bug in a certain environment, it lets us know immediately. And you know, they never stop coming, man. Here's an example. This happened in production. I just have a look. Yeah. So this was quite common. Like it used to happen quite a lot, where the bugs would just keep coming. You know, they just keep dinging me on the phone. You know, and yeah. So this is one of the harder lessons that we've had to learn, and you know, just kind of iterating through that. This really helped us develop a process, you know, for managing that.
So, you know, by the way, this is all during our initial alpha phase. Once we had launched the app to the initial people on the waiting list, and you know, we told them, hey, listen, guys, here's this app. It's not perfect yet, but what we require from you guys is to use it and give us as much feedback as possible. And once we got the feedback from our users, we actually realized it was time to actually press the go button and solidify our infrastructure. And we immediately knew that AWS was the service provider that we wanted to go for. So once Sizzle, I call him Sizzle, once Sizzle and I sat down, we actually started to map out all of the areas of our infrastructure that we wanted to beef out. And once we had that mapped out, we started to handpick out which AWS services we were going to use to beef up those areas. So I'm just, you know, talking through the list from a high level. You can see on the slide, the first service that we knew we were going to use was AWS's Elastic Beanstalk to host our APIs, followed by AWS's VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, to sort of ring fence certain AWS services in a private sort of gateway. AWS S3, simple storage service for our assets as well as to store our database backups. AWS IAM for configuring and managing permissions to our data store, EC2 for our databases, and finally AWS SES, simple email service for sending out blast emails to our customers. So starting off with the first service, Elastic Beanstalk, before we actually jumped into EB, we almost went ahead and used another hosting service, which I shall not name, but it might appear on the slide in front of you. But yeah, Elastic Beanstalk is one of my favorite AWS services. And basically what it is, it's a service that gives you access to cloud computing power. Typically you can configure for yourself how much power you need, and you can typically use it for hosting purposes, or if you have like a job or a task that requires a lot of CPU power, you can just spin up an instance just to take care of that. But for us, we mainly use it to host our APIs. And there's two main things that I really love about Elastic Beanstalk. The first is that it's pretty easy to set up. And the second is that you can configure pretty nifty add-ons such as auto-scaling and load balancing. So let's say one of your environments unexpectedly gets hit with a massive amount of traffic. EB will automatically fire up more instances to manage that load, and when the traffic dies down, it'll slowly switch off all the unneeded instances. And on the next slide, you can see a screenshot of the AWS console for managing your EB instances. I won't lie to you, at first it's pretty daunting to see that console, because there's a lot of options to choose from. There's a lot of drop downs and configurations, but once you actually start playing around with it, and once you actually start getting your hands dirty, you can get more comfortable with Elastic Beanstalk. In fact, what Sizwe and I did was we started off just by clicking around and playing around, firing up instances and then shutting them down, just to get comfortable with the service, and eventually we managed to wrap our heads around it. So as you can see, those are our 3 environments for our APIs. We've got the test environments, the stage environments, as well as the production environment. So whenever we've finished committing code, feature code on our API repos, and we're ready to push those out into production, the first thing we do is deploy that code to the test environment, where we basically test that new code under circumstances pretty similar to production. But in our test environment, we give a small sort of leeway for bugs. We allow bugs to happen in test, and if we pick up bugs, we just push those features back to dev and then start again. Once we're happy with the results in the test environments, we generally push to staging environments. And I like to consider the staging environments as the evil twin brother to production, because at that level we expect nothing to go wrong. We try to keep our staging environments as similar to production as possible, just to replicate what will happen in production. And finally, once we're happy with staging, we push off to production. And last thing, the other thing that I like about EB is it comes with a very nifty CLI, especially when it comes to deploying. It's so simple to deploy using the CLI. It's just a matter of typing EB followed by the name of the environment and then deploy. And then your build will start, and it'll be deployed to the relevant environment. Likewise, on the CLI, you can check the health of your environments. So it's pretty awesome.
Cool. So we use EC2 quite a lot. Obviously, for those familiar, as Ndabenhle spoke about Elastic Beanstalk, essentially what Elastic Beanstalk does is it makes use of EC2, to manage your instances. So we've been using Elastic Beanstalk, EC2 through Elastic Beanstalk, and also by itself as well. Initially when we started doing this, it's another lesson that we learned. As a startup, you probably should go for managed services where you can, because you don't want to spend all that time doing all those things where you have to kind of manage the infrastructure when you could be developing and focusing on your product. So one of the first things we did was spin up an EC2 instance and host our database on there. And we had the 3: stage, test, and production. And you could imagine all the kind of the management that had to go behind that. And this was primarily done because Amazon, I think the only NoSQL service that they had was the DynamoDB, but we were specifically looking for MongoDB, which was not supported out of the box. So we just decided, let's just set up an instance, install it, run it, and perhaps open up port 21 so we can SSH into it, and you can just imagine what kind of security problems that could bring. We've learned from that. We're on a managed solution which is running within EC2. But just to speak about when we did do it that way, we did have our 3 databases. Here's a snapshot of our console, our dashboard. I think the first thing you can observe is that we're still using T1, T2 micro, and it does the job. And what we've had a couple of experts, having a look at our instances, and they've told us that we don't even utilize 1% of the CPU on our production load, and we're serving all these clients, which kind of speaks to you, like, we can look at the instance like, okay, this thing doesn't have much power, but actually, it's really doing quite a decent job in production, You don't have to blow the bank, because the T1, T2, those are the free tier ones. I guess the newer generation T2 is the probably what you want to go for these days. Our tier ones, we have our worker environments going on over there. So, we played around a lot with Elastic Beanstalk. We automated our backups. We just have like had a backup that just kind of runs and kind of does a dump of the entire database and automatically writes it to Amazon S3. We've also experimented like with crisis mode, like what if this database goes down, so how do we kind of restore it, create a snapshot, and then point it over there. We play around with elastic IPs as well, so if this instance goes down, and we set up another one, we can just point that elastic IP to the new one without kind of destabilizing everything. But like I said, all of this is kind of done for you if you're using a managed solution, so you don't have to focus on a lot of these things. But playing around with it was you could learn quite a lot, and when you can, just get your hands dirty over there. And we also use, sorry, just before that, we use SQS for our daemons to kind of route to our Elastic Beanstalk instances via localhost. So we use extensive. There's a lot of services that also came within EC2 that we also made use of, including that, and also the Elastic Block Store. Backing up with the volumes and kind of saving them there every time interval. CloudWatch, every time your CPU utilization gets to 100. I don't know if you've ever had to deal with, I know one thing we had to deal with was maximizing our CPU credits, and this instance is just not performing, and then you get on Elastic Beanstalk, one of your blocks go red, and you can ask Nda, you've never seen me like more quiet, sitting in the corner, just trying to sort something out. It's like, it's such a moment really humbles you. But I think these are the lessons that really build you. And so we've played around a lot with EC2 and we use it quite a lot. Go to the next slide. So we also use Amazon Simple Storage Service and CloudFront. In fact, when I started using Amazon, I started in 2013. S3 was the first service that kind of got me into it. And I think I still have that account and it's in the old format. So if I log on now, it doesn't work. But we use Amazon S3 extensively. We host all our assets. We're an insurance provider, obviously. So on the app, as part of our claims process, we allow people to record voice notes. So our voice notes we also save up to S3 as well. We back up our snapshots of our dumps of the database onto S3 as well. And then our images are also saved there. And then we obviously have our respective buckets, which we kind of filter out, etc. And they're edge distributed via CloudFront. Currently in Ireland, we know Cape Town is opening up next year. We're excited for that. We don't have to go all the way to Ireland and back here just to kind of view data. So I think things will be a lot better, obviously, when the Cape Town region opens. So that's pretty much it. And VPC. This is a great story. So when we first started out, we're still learning the services. So what you need to understand is that about our app is that we communicate with a third-party provider who kind of administers a lot of our insurance activity, and they obviously are subject to auditing, and they have to meet certain standards of security, etc., etc. So naturally, their API is whitelisted, so we have to get our IP address kind of whitelisted over there. And if you're using Elastic Beanstalk, you'll understand that your instances, they change every day, and an IP is attached to a single instance. So fortunately for us, when you created an account on AWS, you're off the bat put in a VPC. And if that wasn't the case, we probably would have seen so much trouble, because every time our instance, production instance, went under maintenance, and Elastic Beanstalk would swap it out for another one, the IP address would change. And this resulted in all these emails, just kind of sending them emails every time, please whitelist this IP, please whitelist this IP. So you can imagine the vulnerability that was starting to build up in their firewall. So fortunately enough, we are in VPC, and this allowed us to then make use of NAT gateways, which dictate, if we're going to come out of this, if you're going to connect to this IP address, use this Elastic IP. And so now that's a thing of the past. What this has also allowed us to do was gate our database away from the general public. So we just keep everything kind of in-house. Our database is never connected to the internet. So you just can't access it, and you don't want it to have internet access. So we're very grateful for VPC. I was under the impression that we were not in a VPC and we had to create one, and my mind started going crazy because at this time we had actually launched and people were using it, and I was panicking so much. But it seems like Amazon already has your back. They know you will need it eventually, so they kind of put you in one automatically. So yeah, that's a lifesaver, man. Like, yeah, I owe my heart to that.
So just to the last three services that we really get a lot of value from AWS is, IAM, SES, Simple Email Service, and SNS, Simple Notification Service. So just to start off with IAM, when we first started out on this journey, myself and Sizwe were the only two developers on the team. So we were sharing the same, AWS console root key for accessing our data store. And it worked. It did what it had to do for the time being. But as our dev team started to grow larger and larger, we needed to be able to give our developers access to this, to the data store, but with segregated read-write capabilities. And that's where IAM really came into help in handy. Essentially, it's a service that allows you to segregate permissions and delegate access keys to your developers on your team. The next service is SES. So since we are an insurance offering, there's a lot of moments where we have to interface or interact with our users by sending out blast emails. So either in the case of an unsuccessful attempt on getting your premiums, or if your policy is about to reach its anniversary dates, we just need to warn you about these things. So we decided to go with SES for sending out batch emails. When we were MVPing the initial Pineapple app, we toyed around with other email services such as the SendGrid API, MailChimp. We even went as far as trying out Gmail, which we obviously got rate limited, so that was quite a funny experiment. And finally, SNS, Simple Notification Service. In app, we send out notifications, when certain interactions happen. So our application is very social heavy. So on Pineapple, you can find your friends, you can send them friend requests, you can like certain items on that timeline. And when these things happen, we send out in-app notifications. And SNS was really pivotal in helping us to roll out that feature. So we're extremely happy about that.
Cool. So I'm just gonna leave you guys with 3 tips, I guess, some things that we had learned along the way. Number 1 is not to be intimidated. And I'll speak about AWS itself and just also your approach as a developer and my personal experience with it. So AWS, if you were in the previous talk, was mentioned that there are 165 services to it. No one is ever gonna learn all of them unless you're an exception, and you're probably not an exception. So even for myself, approaching all those 165 services, kind of thinking, where do you start? It could get a bit overwhelming at times. I know for myself it did. It was just kind of a thing of I really don't know where to start, and I've watched a lot of these tech talks online, etc., where they speak about these services, but on a more managed level, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't even know how to get close to that, But really, you shouldn't be intimidated. Get your hands in there. Get them dirty. And that's kind of the best way to learn, and just to understand that it's a learning process, and you're gonna kind of carry on this with this, carry on this the learning process, learning everything. Just understand that you're just kind of acquiring knowledge, and it'll help, kind of with the intimidation process, because it's quite a common thing that people probably don't really talk about much, but a lot of us do get intimidated by, just by being overwhelmed, or, kind of we feel we don't know as well as we should, So I really, I would definitely say, just not to be intimidated, and just kind of go in there, get your hands dirty,
Tip number 2 is things will go wrong, and as you guys saw from our story, you'll have a lot of ups and a lot of downs. But I think what's important is how you bounce back from things going wrong, and the lessons that you take from things going wrong. If we had had a silky smooth rollout process, chances are we wouldn't have made some of the life-saving decisions we've made in terms of the AWS services that we decided to use. So I think as a startup, if you can just get comfortable with the fact that things will go wrong, and I think that will also lend to you not panicking when things go wrong. You'll be able to approach these issues with a clear mind, and you'll be able to find your way easily out of the rut. So yeah, tip number 2 is that things will go wrong, accept that, and deal with the issues, and you know, keep the journey going.
Yeah, and last but not least, you know, have fun, and like in the literal sense, like just have fun. Obviously, when the bad things do happen, they're serious, and your heart kind of skips just you know, one too many beats. When your production database is down, you're really gonna sit in the corner and stress out, etc. But you will solve it, and when it's over, you'll laugh about it. You know, like it was an experience, and you know, you will have fun in that whole process. And I think it's very important to never forget that. It's just that whole journey of, you know, improving your startup, and you know, kind of working on everything and the learning thing. It's a whole lot of fun, and never forget that, you know, never forget that you're actually like having an experience here. And really, once it's all over and you look back on it, like on that little brief thing you've been through, you know, you'll smile on it and you'll be like, geez, that was quite a lot of fun. You know, it's like extreme sports. It's like, you know, bungee jumping or skydiving or whatever, you know. So yeah, just never forget to have fun. It's a really awesome experience.
So, you know, 9 months after the initial turbulent launch, we were able to, you know, rectify our minor issues and beef up our architecture to the point where we've been blessed enough to be able to take part in amazing programs such as Google's Launchpad program, as well as having won MTN's App of the Year award. And so my number one wish is that for anybody who hopes to start a startup or anybody who's currently starting a startup, I just want you to know that, you know, it's a journey, and it's about what you learn and how you utilize those learnings to spur you forward. You shouldn't be dismayed when things are a bit bumpy at the beginning, because that's how it's supposed to be. What's important is how you ride the turbulence. So yeah, thank you so much for attending our talk, and I don't know if there's any questions that anyone would like to field to us. By the way, we're dropping a major update to the app tomorrow morning. We've done some really awesome stuff to it. So you guys should feel free to download the app tomorrow. If you already have the app, just update it tomorrow. We've got some pretty awesome stuff lined up, so thank you.